Um, so why don't we start with you, Representative? Just introduce yourself to our 10 viewers at home,
Right.
with your name, since you're going first, like a description of the district and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Rich Vile. I live in the farming community of Shoals, which is roughly in the middle of House District 26. Shoals is out along the Tualatin River, and we've been out there about 35 years. We've raised our family there and have a couple of farms that several of our children live on the farms with us.
The farm's actually in production these days?
Yes,
What are you farming?
table grapes. I delivered table grapes to all the Portland metro area schools for the last 5 years. And in fact, just this morning, got up at 5 o'clock and made a delivery of table grapes. That happens all through September, so we'll be down here pretty soon. House District 26 is a very interesting district. It's the fastest growing district in the metropolitan Portland area by far. All 4 of the urban growth boundary applications that are currently pending before Metro are in House District 26. Runs from the South Hillsborough area north of TV Highway down through the Tualatin Valley, Shoals, and then into Sherwood, and then all the way down to Wilsonville, and includes all of Wilsonville north of the Willamette River. Primary issues are transportation in that district. And that's in fact why I decided to run for the legislature in the first place back in 2016.
Great, thank you. So, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Courtney Marin. I have been a lifelong Oregonian and grown up in the Southwest Portland suburbs, right next door to House District 26. And with my family, just moved to Wilsonville in 2015 after a few years of driving our daughter to school there. We had our sights set on it. We love the area and are excited to be there at the edge of the urban growth boundary. I have been a Spanish and French teacher for a total of 9 years, and primarily in the Tiger Tualatin School District, but I also taught briefly in the Yamhill Carlton School District. I am very motivated to run for this office and compelled to be here to represent not only the Democratic voice in our district, which is growing. Our district demographic is changing, as Rich said. We're growing so rapidly that our district now looks different than it did just 2 years ago.
Sorry about the voter registration shifting more Democratic.
The voter registration now, we have just over 1,000 more Democrats than registered Republicans. We still have 15,000 non-affiliated voters. So, but not only because I believe that the Democratic voice needs accurate representation in this district and strong representation, but because I am passionate about fighting for school funding. I really want to make sure that that we have a candidate who is ready to work on school funding for all of the teachers and students in the state.
Can you point to a vote that Representative Vile has taken or a position that he's taken that would suggest to you that he is not passionate about school funding?
I can. He voted no on the measure that would have allowed teachers to bargain class sizes. In my own experience, I had, my largest class size was 39 students in a Spanish class. And last year, the largest class size was 36. Now, this is fairly typical numbers. And at a certain point in teaching, the numbers become a crowd control issue. We know that quality teaching happens with small class sizes, and it's essential that we fund those class sizes.
But if you bargain class sizes without additional resources, aren't you just saying, okay, some kids get nothing, or imposing an unfunded mandate on schools that already have a lot of unfunded mandates? I mean, what would that actually solve?
So we need to be funding schools. And my opponent has said at a city hall that he does not believe we have an education funding problem, that we just need more quality teachers. But the way we get those quality teachers is funding them.
Representative Wiley, you want to respond to that?
Sure. What I did say was that I didn't think that the problem with getting resources into our classrooms, which I do believe is where they should be, is necessarily a macro funding problem, but how we have used those funds. And I do believe that until we have the voters in a position where they trust us enough to do significant revenue reform, we have to recognize that with the demands of healthcare and PERS and transportation and education all clamoring for existing revenue, which does continue to grow, the only real way that we're going to get a solution with respect to education is by managing those funds in a different way. And I do advocate sending more dollars to the classroom and fewer dollars to the state agency that now oversees education.
But isn't class size caps exactly how you get more resources in a classroom? Like that, like speaking as a parent who has a child in public schools, like isn't that like exactly what you want as a parent, is like more attention for a student? Like isn't, and the dollars follow, like dollars go to pay for teacher salaries, so why not cap class sizes?
Yeah, I've got 42 grandkids in the system, and I absolutely
So
feel,
is there a truth to what she's saying, that you voted against a cap? And
well, I voted against in committee. I voted against having class size as a mandatory bargaining element of the teacher's contract. But again, it was because we did not have any way to give those districts additional revenue in the event that that became one of the sticking points for bargaining. And without additional revenue, we were going to leave kids out. We were essentially going to leave kids without a teacher if we had mandatory class size.
so then how should districts, or how should the legislature be directing more resources to classrooms and away from other things, if not through class size caps?
Yeah, the legislature's in a tough spot. The legislature is somewhat subject to what the agency decisions are. Now, one of the things that I was really disturbed by, because I was on the education committee during the 2017 session, is that we had just about every committee meeting another program that would have sucked up 1 or 2 or 3 FTEs and a few $1 million into the state agency rather than sending that money to the schools. So we had this relatively fixed amount. We did increase significantly funding for schools during 2017, during that biennium, but we did not have any mechanism that would force that money into the schools rather than into the administrative pot. And that's what I continue to be concerned about. I believe it's a matter of how we allocate our resources right now. Someday perhaps we will have a path to get genuine revenue reform that'll kind of even out these peaks and valleys that we have here in Oregon. But until that happens, we really have to be more careful about how we allocate our resources and get more of them down to the classroom.
You've used the term revenue reform a couple of times. What does that mean to you?
You know, it's hard to say, Nigel, if that's going to mean some sort of a sales tax that is a more consistent revenue type of package, or if it's a sales, or excuse me, a property tax change of some kind. I don't know. But the problem that we have in even starting those discussions right now is that our public trust of government's ability to manage the revenue that we do have is so low that we can't even get those conversations started. Measure 97 was, I think, the best example of that we've had in a long time.
I forget your position on that.
Measure 97? I opposed Measure 97. Yeah, I did not
But
think
you'd
that...
be open to a sales tax?
I would be open to a conversation about revenue reform that included sales tax, that included property tax reform, that included all of the ways that other jurisdictions have solved this problem.
Go ahead.
I hear what Rich is saying about sales tax, but and I think a lot of legislators would agree that that is a potential to put on the table at some point. However, Oregon has repeatedly said they do not want a sales tax. Currently, we have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the nation at 6.7%. In the 80s, it was at 18%, maybe in the 70s, it was 18%. So our corporate tax rate has gone down significantly over the last 3 decades. And as it's gone down, our class sizes have gone up, our teachers are getting more burnt out, our students are more overwhelmed, and the tasks that we're being asked to do are not getting any easier. I believe that, and I do have my eye on the 3/5 majority, that if we can get the right makeup of the House of Representatives, we can change the corporate tax structure, closing the corporate tax loopholes and helping making corporations, the largest corporations and largest income earners, both in and out of state, pay their fair share. I am not a corporate-backed candidate, so I can say that freely, that I would be happy to be a voice for teachers over corporations.
I'm a little foggy on what kind of, so what kind of revenue or tax legislation would you support and you think would actually make it through the legislature if there were a 3/5 majority?
Increasing the corporate tax level, closing any corporate loopholes that are allowing our largest corporations to get away with not paying their fair share. Currently, the working class, the middle class, we are carrying the weight of the revenue need on our shoulders, and we need to make sure that our largest income earners in the state are playing fair in that game.
Representative Vial, your law practice, I believe, was primarily a real estate practice?
Yeah.
So right now, the state of Oregon, like many states, allows a mortgage interest deduction for first and second homes and provides relatively little financing at the state level for affordable housing. So we're giving a huge tax break to middle class people like those in this room and giving very little to people who are sleeping on the streets. I'm just curious what you think about that philosophically. Are we incentivizing the wrong people? Are we misallocating dollars that could be used to house people?
The primary residence tax deduction, I think, is something that I would have a lot of difficulty backing away from. I still believe that home ownership is one of the things that contributes to our society in a very positive way, not only financially, as it's shown over many decades now, but I think just socially. It is a very important part of the social fabric that we have.
Even up to $1 million homes?
What's that?
Even up to $1 million homes?
Well, my experience is that most of the folks that have $1 million homes don't have $1 million mortgages and are not deducting $1 million interest payments. But I was just starting to say that on the second home issue, I'm willing and interested in having more of a conversation about whether that's legitimate. Do we need to be deducting interest expenses on more than a place that we shelter our family?
What about the general principle of trying to find ways to provide more state level funding? I mean, the low income tax credit game has been the primary way of providing state level funding for affordable housing that's been affected by the Trump tax changes. Are there ways that you are interested in or thinking about in terms of trying to bring your professional expertise to the legislature and do something about this big problem?
Well, Nigel, I did vote in favor of the amendment that would allow our bond funds to be used in private-public partnerships. And I'm
Which
still
is now Measure 102.
Now Measure 102.
Yeah.
And I'm still the chair of the Washington County Planning Commission, so we've had a lot of discussions around this issue recently. I remain convinced that the counties are a much better place for us to find solutions to these housing issues. In fact, Washington County, we've added many thousands of units just recently using a number of techniques.
Washington County is the only county that has a transfer tax, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. How much does that generate?
Boy, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's significant enough that it helps us in a number of places, including a lot of our social services and with respect to our housing subsidies. We've got the healthiest Section 8 programs anywhere in the state, right in Washington County, and
How do you measure that?
well, just by virtue of the fact that we have a much many fewer folks on the street because we're able to find units for them. A lot of the other counties are complaining because they just don't have the units to put their HUD Section 8 folks into.
So do you support the Metro housing bond?
That one I do not support. I think Metro has shown an inability to be a good steward on a number of planes, and in this particular case, I just think that the amount of money that they're raising relative to the amount of homes that would actually be built is not significant in terms of solving the overall problem. And Metro is just not in the business of being a housing authority. And we've seen over the years throughout the country that when an entity like Metro decides to become the housing authority, it really doesn't end up being a very good solution.
Even if they, I mean, I think the plan is that they would essentially be a pass-through agent for the county, for the local housing, local area governments to develop the housing.
Right. And yet every county commissioner that I've talked to that's looked carefully at how that quote-unquote pass-through would work is so skeptical of whether it would really help them that they're opposing it. Commissioner Dyke in Washington County.
In Washington County.
Yeah, Commissioner Dyke in Washington County being the foremost among those verbally speaking out against it.
Can we go back to something you said? Oh my gosh, now I've lost it. Maybe we'll come back in a minute.
If I can go back to your question though, Nigel, we do have to address the housing issue. It's two issues actually. It's a housing affordability for my children who are getting a start in life and nowhere really to find an affordable home in the market that they also can get a job in. And it's also a homelessness problem that is even more complex, that includes all sorts of issues around healthcare, particularly mental health care. To be honest with you, I'm flabbergasted right now that the OHA has denied the certificate of need for the 150 bed unit in Wilsonville when we know we need inpatient.
Why do you think they denied that facility a certificate of need?
Well, I read the 167-page report that justified their denial, and I'll tell you that I think that one unfortunately is political. The reasons they gave were there's a better way to do this. Mental health is something that we should approach with more community-based, more outpatient, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the folks at OHA that said those things are genuinely altruistic in their efforts to try and find the correct solution. But the reality is we don't have that stuff yet, and we do have folks that don't have any place to lay their head and are committing suicide or committing crimes or finding themselves curled up in the fetal position on the sidewalk, and we got to have a place for them.
You don't think the opposition was also in part because it's a private for-profit that's had some troubles elsewhere?
Well, that's why I said I think it's political.
So,
I think the private for-profit piece drives a question about union labor and the fact that we were going to have a whole bunch of what would be frankly very good union jobs right here in our district was something that I felt very strongly was a good thing.
Yeah.
But SEIU showed up to every one of those hearings and it was clear that they weren't supporting that.
What did Wilsonville, Courtney, do you know if Wilsonville took a position on whether, because citing facilities is controversial no matter what the facility is. You know, if Wilsonville took a position on the softball.
I am unfamiliar with that one, but I would love to comment on some of the other
Sure.
things that we've been
Go ahead.
talking about.
Yep.
As Rich has said, he values home ownership, and I do too, in terms of an economic, a great investment for a lot of people, usually. And yet, he voted against the new homeowner tax benefits that would have made it easier for people who are trying to get into the housing market to purchase their first home.
That was essentially the 529 plan for homeowners, right?
Yeah.
You could save tax-free against a down payment.
Exactly. So I feel like those two things don't go together. I definitely think that that's something that would have been a great idea. My husband and I bought at the height of the market in 2007 and rode it all the way down. And we would have loved to have help getting into a healthy housing market when we were trying so hard to save for that first house. Our timing didn't work out, but when we have a solution, I think we need to be taking it.
Did you keep your house?
It's a very complicated story. We did.
Okay.
Yes, we worked very hard at that. And the other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that our urban growth boundary in our district is wide open right now. There's building up and down the whole urban growth boundary. So we have Bull Mountain, especially King City will be as well expanding. The area around the new Beaverton High School, Mountainside High School. So much building is happening throughout our district. And the idea is to provide housing. When we know that there are 16,000 new units in Portland that are uninhabited, we also can see that there's not necessarily a lack of housing. It's the more appropriate housing that we need to find. We need to find housing that is affordable to the people that work and live in an area. What we're doing right now is opening up our urban growth boundary, and yet there is housing to find. And what I'm noticing is there's not necessarily inclusionary housing or supportive housing within these new developments. So it's definitely aimed at a certain demographic, and we need to make sure we're having a variety of housing in each planning development that goes in. I feel like when solutions are on the table, we need to take them. I am all for Measure 102. I think it's so important that we allow for private and public partnerships that will help bring down costs and attend to where those affordable housing units need to be built.
Courtney, can you tell us, since we haven't met you before, we often ask candidates about their independence. Can you tell us a place where you might differ from your fellow Democrats?
Generally, I feel like I align quite closely with the current Democratic platform. So one thing though, as I'm getting into this campaign for the first time, I am very aware of campaign finance issues, and I am all for campaign finance reform, because what I'm seeing is some of our greatest minds in the state spend half their day trying to fundraise money when they could be solving problems. Knowing that we have had Democratic leadership in Oregon, I'm surprised that we haven't taken this on as an issue that potentially we could address. So that's one area that I'm surprised maybe in terms of current leadership that I might deviate.
Okay. Rich, I feel like I'm lobbing you an underhanded softball right down the middle of the plate, but I got to ask you the same question. I think I know what your answer is. Tell us a place on which you have deviated from your caucus where you've taken a tough vote or taken a position that got you sideways with your leadership.
Well, I think you and I have talked about this before, and there's lots of places where I argue with my caucus's leadership, but the two that got me a primary this cycle were the boyfriend loophole on the gun bill and the immigration issue as it related to driver's cards. Both pretty tough votes to take. One of those times when the folks that write you the emails can get under your skin a little bit, but I don't regret in any way at all, having done so.
Driver's cards, when did that come up for you? Because that was a 2014 issue, right?
Yeah, it came up again though for the DACA kids in
Okay.
2018,
Okay.
and I took the vote.
Okay. You voted to give them
Yeah,
cards?
if they, the issue was if somebody had already registered with the feds and had their DACA registration once,
Yeah.
and Trump had rolled that back, which was dumb in my opinion, but there was no reason why that individual who already had the registration, we already knew who they were, we had their fingerprints, we had everything, no reason why we shouldn't give them a driver's card, so I voted for it.
So does that mean you're against Measure 105?
Measure 105 is a very difficult one. Cheryl Atkinson just Sunday morning had a long show on the whole undocumented immigrant in the justice system report, and it was pretty illuminating. I have not taken a position on 105, but I support the position that Pat Garrett, the sheriff of Washington County, and Kevin Barton, the new DA in Washington County, have taken, which is we don't need to repeal this sanctuary state law. We are doing everything we need to do with respect to undocumented aliens right now. We're afraid if it gets repealed that regardless of the legal impact, the message to undocumented aliens is we can't afford to come in and help law enforcement with the things that we should be helping them with. So
So I hear in that you're a no, but that it's very difficult to say that. Is that where Republican voters are in Washington County right now?
Republican voters, I think, in Washington County are just like every other voter. They're all struggling with this issue. I mean,
I don't think a lot of voters in Oregon are struggling, but we'll find out, I think.
in House District 26, I believe they are.
Uh-huh.
Representative, I read the op-eds that Sheriff Garrett and DA Barton wrote, and they're clearly no's.
They're clearly knows because of that issue.
Right. So if they're clearly no's and you support them, it sounds like you're a no.
I support the reasons why they're a no.
You're going to lawyer us on this.
I'm going to lawyer you on this one. This is one of those things where I can't hide from my votes on the floor. I can't hide from my votes in committee. They're very, very public. But sometimes I think it's appropriate for a human being, even if they're a legislator, to hold their peace. Because I'll be perfectly honest with you, often I don't know until the moment I sit that ballot in front of me and really search my heart.
This is a case where you don't know until you have your ballot, or
I don't know. I may decide before then, but as of this moment, I don't know what I'm going to do on this one.
Okay, what about the grocery tax measure?
I'll vote no on the grocery tax measure.
No, meaning you don't support the grocer's position.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I got to be careful. No's a yes sometimes.
So you want to, you agree with the grocers that there should be
Yeah.
no grocery tax?
Yeah.
What about the 3/5 measure?
Um,
The realtors would like to say anything that changes a tax break or raises a fee needs a 3/5 majority vote.
yeah, the raises the fee part, I don't like.
Okay,
The changes the tax break part,
yeah.
I think is the same as we can either increase a tax
Uh-huh.
or we can remove a tax break. It's the same effect on the taxpayer.
Okay, so how are you going to vote on that?
I'll vote no on that. I'll vote
With the realtors or against?
with the realtors on that one. Yeah.
So
and wait, let's just finish the measures. The abortion measure.
The what?
Abortion measure.
106.
6.
That's another one where I'm gonna take my right to a private ballot to the very moment I mark it.
Okay.
I will say this about abortion because I think it's important for my constituents to know. I have strong feelings about the sanctity of life, and I did oppose in the House the bill that allowed us to fund publicly abortions right up until a woman went into labor. I am not happy about that, so that's on the record, and I think it's important for folks to know.
Okay. Courtney, your positions on these ballot measures?
Okay, let's do this. So 102, I'm voting yes. I'm voting no on all of the rest of them. The grocer's tax is misleading. It's unnecessary. We don't need this in our constitution. We don't even have a sales tax. And it classifies certain things as groceries that are not groceries necessarily, like restaurant meals and the bottle refund. 104 is the 3/5, and it would essentially gridlock our elected officials who we elect and we trust. And when it would essentially gridlock them to not be able to repeal a tax loophole or something like that. So it would not give them the rights that we hope that they can make those decisions with the simple majority. 105 is a frightening measure. It is going to allow for more profiling. It's going to make certain people more afraid to call the police if they are in danger because they might fear the coordination between a federal agency. It essentially making people less safe. We've had our sanctuary law in Oregon since 1987, and there's no need to repeal it. It's backed by a white supremacist group, and it's something we all should be afraid of. It absolutely is a no. Number 106, I support a woman's right to choose. The late-term abortions are often the most tragic and the most personal, and we have no right to cherry-pick medical procedures and decide a woman's body, what's going to happen to a woman's body. She and her doctor should make that decision. So I do not support cuts to care.
Representative, I want to ask you, in the Measure 97 debate in 2016, a lot of people said, a lot of people who opposed it and were successful in opposing it said the ballot box is the wrong place to make tax policy, especially big tax policy. So here we have two very big pieces of tax policy put forth by the same people who opposed making tax policy at the ballot box just 2 years ago. As a legislator and somebody who's got your legal background, how can you how can you support these measures that are written like in crayon about that they're going into the Constitution having been hastily drafted and written, for very specific economic agendas? How can you let people do that to the tax code?
Do you mean written in crayon was
written poorly.
I understood what you meant.
Do you agree that they're written poorly?
Yeah, that I do agree on.
Then why are you voting yes?
Because honestly, I do feel that the effort by my colleagues to get this 2/3 majority in the House and of course the Senate is to do nothing more than to raise taxes. That's
3/5.
3/5, excuse me. Yeah, 3/5. And it's unhealthy.
What about the grocery tax? You said a few minutes ago that you were open to a sales tax. This would foreclose much of what a sales tax might do.
With respect to that particular element, it's written poorly. It just doesn't make sense to me, Nigel. It's part of the conversation that we probably ought to have.
I'm not sure it is written poorly. It's written very broadly to protect a wide group of industries.
Yeah. And
you think it was just accidental that it was done to protect this wide?
Oh no, this is one where the sausage factory was really cranked up, and the lobbyists, that 15-minute speed date we get in the Capitol, where it's partly let me tell you my position and partly let me tell you what's going to happen to you, Mr. Legislator, if you don't vote the way we want you to vote.
Yeah.
That was really heated up around this whole question, and as a result we got a bill that was just written poorly, and I can't support it.
Okay, we're running out of time. Unfortunately, we have a whole day of these things.
Shucks.
Wait, I'm confused. Didn't you say you were voting for this?
We're talking about grocery tax.
Grocery tax.
Oh, you're saying. But you're voting yes on 103, right?
103 is the
Grocery tax. You're with the grocers or you're against it?
I'm with the grocers on it. But I do not support the concept of this is the way to do tax policy.
Yeah, but this is going in the Constitution. The only way to undo it is not in the legislature. It's going back to the ballot box. So
That's
I'm
right.
confused about like your description. What were you describing there? If not, anyway.
If you read the way the doggone thing is written, it is really bad policy. But I believe the grocers are correct in asking to be protected from this 3/5 threat that is being imposed upon them. And I think for social policy, it's appropriate that the grocers get that protection.
All right, we have one question that is designed to
Amuse us.
show our readers your humanity and a different side of you. This year the question is very straightforward. It is, what are you afraid of? Now, some people have gone right to spiders. Some people have gone to, a world that will never be peaceful. So some people are very focused. Some people are more broad and philosophical. So it's up to you. Representative Weil, will put you on the spot first. What are you afraid of?
Well, I'm usually prepared for this when somebody's tipped me off what it's going to be. Nobody tipped me off this time.
Admitted that on camera.
When I am prepared, I try to come up with something pithy and interesting. I'm not feeling particularly like I want to be cute this morning, though, to be honest with you. And, my biggest fear is the same fear that I think all of us have, that somebody's going to discover the fact that we're a fraud, that we're not everything we say we are or want to be. That comes out, in my mind, my biggest fear is that I'll succumb to the shame that inevitably follows vulnerability. That when I'm open about something, when I'm really attempting to be genuine about something, it's inevitable that I'm going to be castigated by somebody. And in this world where that castigation occurs so quickly in a tweet or on the internet or whatever, it is easy to find myself not being courageous and bold about the next thing that I think I want to do because of that castigation. So my biggest fear is that I'll succumb to the shame of that follows vulnerability, is the way I would say that.
We forgot to ask you before, have you run for elected office before?
Not since high school.
What do you?
Bless your heart for stepping up. Courtney, bless your heart.
What am I afraid of?
Yeah.
This morning, I was afraid of an interview at Willamette with Nigel.
All right. Now you found out that's not so bad.
It's not so bad, but I actually feel like, in all seriousness, though, we all have big fears, and as a mother, that something tragic might happen to my children is easily my worst fear.
Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.